From the main menu, we go into our test functions menu, select the COM menu, then select the AM for an AM COM. This now brings up the AM COM test screen. Like all of the test screens that we have on the ARTS-7000, the left side of the screen are the preset conditions. In this case, we have frequency, power, modulation, and ident. And on the right side of the screen, those are the displays for the test when the test is running. Standard with all the screens, in the bottom left-hand corner is the config menu. Push the config and bring up the AM config screen. This gives you a number of choices on how to set up the test. The first one at the top is the port selection. In this case, it's displaying cable. I can change that to an antenna connection. Next ones are the frequency, power, and power measurement values. The frequency, if I push the preset value, I can change this from a preset value to an 8.33 kHz space channel, or a 25 kHz space channel, or variable. The presets are values that Laversab have defined as standard test values. The 8.33 and the 25 kHz are quite self-explanatory in terms of the channel spacing, and the variable gives you control over any frequency within the band. I'm going to set it to preset. The next one is the power. I can set the power value as dBm, millivolts, or microvolts. Most people operate in dBm, so I'm going to leave it as dBm. The power measurement can be changed from peak to average using this selector on the right. I'm going to leave it as peak. So that's the basic configuration. This will now be stored and remain this configuration for every AM test going forward, unless you wish to change it. Exit on top left out of the screen. So I'm back to my test screen. Like I mentioned, on the left-hand side you have the frequency, power, modulation, and ident. Let's start by changing the frequency. So if I push the frequency values, this brings up our preset frequencies. In this case, I'm going to change to 137.0 MHz. The power, same thing. If I press the value, this brings up our power selection screen. And you can see the range there is anything from minus 83 dBm to positive 13 dBm. In this case, I'm going to set it to 10 dBm as a positive value. The modulation, if I click the modulation value, the 30%, this allows me to change the percentage of modulation from any value from 0 to 95. I'm going to leave it at 30, so in this case I'm going to just exit out of this screen. And the ident. If I click the off button, this now shows the ident that I can transmit on this AM signal from the ARTS to the aircraft. I can switch it off. I can have it as a tone, that's a single 1 kHz continuous tone. Or I can have code being a Morse code, where we will transmit LSB in Morse code to the aircraft. In this case, I'm going to do it as a code. So now you can see on the left-hand side, we've set up our test, 137 MHz, 10 dBm, 30% modulation, and the ident is code. Now we move to the right-hand side of the screen. At the top, you have the RX and the TX buttons, the RX in red, the TX in grey. The ARTS base configuration will always start in receive mode. That is, receive the signal from the aircraft into the ARTS. You can change it very simply by clicking on it. When the test is configured, we hit the start test. The ARTS is now listening effectively on the 137 MHz channel for a transmission from the aircraft. At this point, you would go into the aircraft cockpit, push the PTT, having tuned the radios to the right frequency, and then the values on the right would be filled. Frequency, power, modulation, and audio frequency would be filled. To change to transmit, all I hit is the TX button at the top. I'm now transmitting that Morse code signal into the aircraft that you would hear on the cockpit speaker or on the headset. And I can change receive to transmit very simply. To do a selectivity test, if I'm transmitting to the aircraft, I can push the 137 MHz in this case, or the values. This brings up a frequency control field. This allows me to change the frequency in the steps indicated from 100 kHz, 10 kHz, and 1 kHz. I can slowly increase from 1 kHz, and you can see the frequency value changing. I can go back down as well and change by 10 kHz steps. This allows you to do a sensitivity test for the response of the radio. This is active when this pop-up screen is available. If I exit, you'll notice that the frequency in the top left goes back to the original 137 MHz transmitted frequency. The same thing for the power. If I click the power button, this brings up another screen that allows me to change the power in very small increments of 1 dBm. I can increase the power very slowly or in a large value. Again, whatever I change here, as soon as I exit, it goes back to the original value. So that's how we do a COM-AM test. I'll hit the stop test. So now we're back into our preset mode, and then exit back to the main menu. And back again on the functions menu to our main functions menu.